Kicking it through the uprights, hold tight. Amazing stories, feely stories, out of sight. Jaw-dropping tales, just a real thrills. They're always unreal. Kicking through the uprights, the legend seals the deal.
Good morning, and welcome to the second ever episode of Kicking It Through the Uprights, Tall Tales and True Stories. This is Tom Feely coming to you from, we're in the Riverview area in the Hillsborough or Tampa Bay, out fishing today. It's a beautiful day. We've had just incredible weather this last week. Temperatures coming down, the humidity's coming down, and it's awesome. Let's move on to today's true stories. Now I'm going to start with a kind of a cute story that happened to me early on in my life. I was 14 years old. My family, for as long as I could remember, on the week of my birthday, would go to my grandparents' cabin. Really wasn't a cabin. It was really more of a beautiful home on Lake Bemidji in northern Minnesota. Lake Bemidji, well, you know, you're about an hour from North Dakota and about an hour from Canada. So it's in that northwest part of Minnesota, full of lakes, absolutely fabulous. And we had the best time. We went there every single June, and we celebrated my birthday. Now, a quick story on my 9th birthday. My two older brothers, I'm going to be introducing them to you in a couple weeks, but my two older brothers, Pat, who then was 17, and my brother Dick, who was about 15 at the time, and I was 9. So they decided, because it was my birthday, my 9th birthday, that they were going to give me a real, proper initiation. And this is where the custom of initiation began. So they decided that I needed to be tied to a birch tree behind the cabin. They got out, both of them got some wooden paddles, and they decided to give me 9 spankings each. Well, of course, being 9 years old, I'm going to tough it out. But the longer I held off at crying or yelling out for help or whatever, they just got a little bit harder. So their goal was to make me cry. And that's what big brothers in those days did to little brothers. I did my fair share of torture to my younger brother. Danny was 6 years younger than me. So, you know, I was as guilty as they were. So they gave me 9 paddles each, which mounted to obviously 18. And by the time they were done, my father heard me screaming and came out. And he was not too happy. So that was at 9 years old. And just a memory of that has stuck in my head. But overall, the week at Bemidji was always a lot of fun. And then let's fast forward about 5 more years, actually 6. 5 years. I'm 14 years old, and I discovered girls. So I noticed the day before that there was this beautiful girl about my age sitting on the dock, few houses down from our cabin at Rutgers Lodge. So what I did is I borrowed my grandpa's small boat. It was real flat, almost just a flat little boat, steering wheel, and a 25 horse motor, which to me was a huge motor because I'm used to real putt-putts. So I decided to go down there and introduce myself to this girl. And she really was cute. So I got down there and we talked and laughed, and she was impressed with my boat. And I said, "You want to go for a ride?" And so she hopped in, and we headed back towards our cabin. We got just about in front of our cabin. I knew from having driven this boat many times that it was designed for the Bahamas, where it gets real shallow. Sometimes around here it does as well. It gets real shallow, and they designed the boat so that being a flat bottom, you could go in real shallow water and even hit sand, hit the beach. Your motor would automatically rise up. It was just designed that way, so that the propeller was never digging in or digging into the sand or the dirt or whatever is at the bottom of the lake. So the motor just rolls up. So I knew that, and I knew I could take that boat and literally drive it onto the beach and not do any harm to it. So I get out there, and being an idiot 14-year-old, I decide I'm going to kind of spook her. And this is our first time actually together. So she's like sitting on my lap, learning how to drive a boat. And I head towards the beach, and I gun it, right? And I'm heading right towards the shoreline, right towards the beach. And she's like, TJ, you better slow down. It's getting too close. And she starts to panic. And I'm not going to slow down. I'm going to drive that boat right up the beach like I've done before. And she's really getting wide-eyed and scared. And all of a sudden, she grabs the throttle, which is going full front, full gear forward, and she slams it into reverse. Well, I hear this loud bang, and I look back at the motor, and there's smoke coming out of it. And then about that time, we hit the beach and slid right up with, no harm to us, no harm to the boat, but the motor was smoking. Well, needless to say, I totally ruined the motor. And my dad was so furious with me. And we had to take the motor in. My dad had to find out that he had to replace the motor. So he was so mad. He told me I'm going to be working that bill off for the rest of my life if it takes that long. So I learned a hard lesson. Unfortunately, didn't learn it well enough because I made the same mistake a few times again. We'll talk about that another day. But that was my grandfather and grandmother Long's place on Lake Bemidji. They were my mother's parents. Now, I tell you that story to give you a little background of this main story I want to tell today. And this story is truly out of this world. So I know you're going to say, did that really happen? But I promise you, it did. And I will prove it before this episode is over. So stay tuned. You may have heard of Roswell, New Mexico in I believe 1948, 1949. Supposedly a spaceship crashed, and supposedly they may or may have not recovered the spaceship, and according to the legend, including an alien body that was deceased in the spacecraft. You've seen movies, Area 51 about this, and probably have heard about it. So that took place in, I think, 48, 49, that era. In 1950, my grandfather, the same one that owned the cabin on Lake Bemidji, his name was H.D. Long, Harry David Long. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Harry David Long was a farmer, but he was more than a farmer. He actually had not one, but 2 PhDs from the University of Minnesota, one in biology and one in botany. He was a brilliant scientist. And he was an entrepreneur. So while he was going to school, all those years he was going to the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, he worked at a barber shop. So he made money by cutting hair in St. Paul, actually, which is right across the river from Minneapolis, not far from the University of Minnesota. So so he, earned his degrees, and then went into business, made some money, and then eventually he bought a farm in Park River, North Dakota. Now it's not a big town. It's a little town in North Dakota, but he bought a potato farm there. And that's where he began his farming career. But he not only farmed, but at the same time, he invented. He invented machinery that would make the farmers' tasks easier, that they could, plow the fields better, whatever. So he was an inventor, and he had many patents on his inventions. But his absolute most legendary accomplishment as a farmer and a scientist, he used his knowledge of botany to solve a problem that all farmers had that farmed potatoes. He was a potato farmer, so one of the problems they had was a disease of the potato. They referred to it as rust. I'm sure it had a much different scientific name. Some kind of fungus that would attack the potatoes and ruin the crop and cost the farmers a great deal of money. So what he did is he created a hybrid potato, and he named this hybrid potato the Pontiac potato. And then he sent this new type of potato, sent it into the government to get its patent for it, so that he could patent it and make more money off of it. So and that potato was called the Pontiac potato because he had a car. It was a Pontiac, and the car was red, and the potato was uncharacteristically of normal potatoes, had a red skin to it, a red color. Today, we all know this potato as the red potato. So I'm sure you're very familiar with that, probably eaten many red potatoes in your life. But it was my grandfather who created this potato because it was tolerant and resistant to this rust fungus, and solved the problem of that particular disease to potatoes. And so he, made his name, and I think probably some of his wealth was derived because of that particular innovation in the potato industry. Eventually, he went on to own 2 more farms. Quite interestingly, he bought a cotton farm in Mississippi, and then his absolute prize was an orange plantation in Coral Gables, Florida. That also was his downfall, because when he bought the orange plantation, almost immediately in the first winter, his crop was destroyed because of freeze. So he lost a great deal of money. But he was not going to give up. Second time around, the second winter, it froze again. Now, Coral Gables, Florida, as you know, is down by Miami. A freeze down there is rather rare, but they actually had 3 in a row. Each one sent him further into bankruptcy. So, as a result of 3 successive years of freezing, he lost the he lost the orange plantation, he lost the cotton farm. The only thing that remained was the potato farm that he originally bought. And then he passed that on to his son to run, because by then he was rather old. Now, when it got towards his final years of his life, and this is the memory that I'm sharing with you today, he sat down with me. He probably knew he didn't have many years left, and I think he died about a year later. He sat down with me in his in his office, and he told me about his story of something that happened to him in 1950. Now, so this would have been, I think I was about 8, 9 years old, so it would have been maybe 1960. I could be off by a year, so forgive me if I am. But he sat down with me and told me about an experience that he had in Park River. See, they would leave Park River in the fall after they harvested and sold their potatoes. They would go down to Mississippi, visit the cotton farm, then go to Coral Gables and spend the winter, naturally, in Coral Gables, Florida. My mom, who was a young girl at the time, would have to be taken out of school in Park River and then enter into a different school down in the Coral Gables area for the winter and then do the reverse in the spring. So one day he was getting ready to leave, and he needed to put some shingles on his roof. So he's up on his roof. It's in the afternoon on a clear day. Wasn't even cloudy. And he's pounding shingles, pounding nails into his roof to get it ready for the winter. And suddenly he looks up and he sees something that at first he couldn't believe his eyes. And he thought, well, maybe it's a balloon. Now, this is bright daylight. This object was above the tree line, but not real high in the sky. He could see it very clearly. And he realized after a while, it was now no balloon. It was being propelled, but it was silent. And it had this blue light that went back and forth, sweeping left to right, right to left across the ground. It was a cigar shape. And he dawned on him that what he was seeing was what they called then a UFO, unidentified flying object. Now, most of us would have just sat there in awe, frozen, maybe in fear. But my grandfather, being the scientist and curious, he got off his roof, ran into the house, got some things together, including his camera and a notebook and a pen, and he came back out. He snapped a picture. In those days, pictures were black and white. And he snapped a picture with his Kodak camera, whatever it was, and he started taking notes. Now, this thing was not going fast. It was going very, very slow, but it was still making its progress from the east towards the west. And it was just high enough so that, it was above the trees and above the houses. You can see the trees and the houses. And it was very, very, very clear. So it eventually went off into the horizon, heading west. And then over the next week, now in those days, 1950s, the main source of information, news, was through the radio. Television in those days was in its infancy, really in its infancy. Not a lot of people had televisions yet. So, and if they did, it was just a small little black and white tube. So his main source of information that he gathered was newspapers. So he found newspapers that reported the same thing that he saw about the same time, on the same day. And with that, he created a map to chart by charting where people reported to their local newspaper the sighting that they saw and what they described. He was able to pinpoint the time, and he was able to pinpoint the exact location by their descriptions, and he created a map of that. He also then, with his own notes, the things that he observed, he wrote a report, a very detailed report that as any scientist would do. He did one more thing. He went one step further. He built a model of this spacecraft that he saw so he could give people a visual of what he saw. And his intention was to report all of this to the government so that they would know, they would be aware that this has happened and that this is real and that this is a very scientifically observation of this phenomena. So he sent that report in to the Army Air Force, who were in charge of that kind of thing, I guess. He sent the report into the U.S. Army Air Force. In those days, the Air Force hadn't yet separated from the Army and become its own branch. I think that happened in 52 or whatever. But anyway, he sent the report in to whether it was Army Air Force or the Air Force, I'm not sure. And then a little bit of time went by, and there was a knock on the door. When he opened the door, there were several Air Force officers, and they came into his house, and they demanded to see everything that he had on this UFO. They confiscated the model that he made. They already had the report that he sent in. They wanted everything that he had, and so he had, and they threatened that he would lose all of his patents if he didn't cooperate or if he repeated the story ever again. They were very, very intimidating from what he told me. So after that, it just became something he told his children and his grandchildren, but nobody else. They passed away, of course, and then years later, decades later, many decades later, my mom and dad passed away. And when they passed away, not at the same time, of course, but when the two of them had passed away, we had taken all of their belongings, their, the important things that they saved in their lives, and we had put them into a storage shed, my brothers and I, put them into a storage shed so that when the time was possible for all of us to gather at the same time, we would go through their things and we'd, divvy it out because they hadn't done that in a will. So we'd divvy up who wanted this. Most of it was like pictures and, small items that had not great value, but some jewelry, things like that, dishes, things that they had collected over the years that were important to them and maybe important to some of their children. So we had this event where we went through, and it was a fun event. It was very congenial. But one of the things that I came across was a file folder, a very old file folder. And when I pulled it out, I realized what it was. This file folder contained the notes that my grandfather wrote, his first draft of the report that he had later retyped and sent in, and a picture. I could not believe my eyes. I'd actually found it. And so I claimed it as mine. Because to me, this was very special. That story that my grandfather told me about this, when you're a kid, you think, yeah, our grandfathers tell stories. They exaggerate. They tell stories. Maybe they're true. Maybe they aren't. Who knows? But that's what grandpas do. But this verified his story to me. Now I want to share this with you. And I apologize. This is the file. In the file folder, I found the map that he created. If you can see that, lit up. That's the map that showed the exact route that that particular UFO followed. It also contained his lengthy report right here, his notes, his everything he wrote on it is very brown, very old paper. But then it's all in here. The whole entire report, not the final draft that he sent in, because he never got any of that back. Not the model that he created and not the final report. But in this, I got to be very careful. I don't want to lose anything. And here, this, I found the picture of the UFO. Now, I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to hold it up to the camera here. Bring it in even a little closer. I have no idea how clear that is or not. But you can see up here is the UFO. It's very clear on here. And down here are the trees and the houses. So it's not far above the trees and the houses. On the backside, there's a stamp. I need to read you that stamp. Pardon me while I change glasses. I'm blind and can't see a dang thing. It says Coda Color Print. And then at the bottom, October 16th, 1950. So that's when this was developed, I believe. October 16th, 1950. So this probably happened a day or so before that. Maybe the 15th, maybe the 14th, however long it took him to have this developed. So we have the actual proof of his story, of his experience with the UFO. And now you know the true story. Till next time, have a great week. We'll be back again. If you'd like to comment on this, you can do so in two ways. I mentioned last week an email address that you could send an email to us, and that address is tfeely, that's TFEELY, at me.com. I also now have a phone number you can call and leave a message. That phone number is 813-776-6774. And you have a blessed week, and thank you, and I hope you come back, and we'll talk to you then. I have many more stories to tell you.